So this weekend, big deal in our family. We're putting our only child on a plane and sending her further away from home than she's ever been. I'm thrilled. I'm devastated. I'm also reflective as I consider my parenting journey over the past 21 years. I think I was a pretty good mother. I only ever lost her once. We were in a Ross Dress for Less, which has these impossibly long racks just stuffed with clothing, and while I was sifting through one of these racks, I suddenly noticed that I was alone in the aisle, and that was alarming as I had started out with a small child in tow. My heart filled with panic and dread, imagining the worst. Kidnapping for sure, for that child was usually Velcroed to my side, so it was kind of off-brand for her to be missing. I sprinted the impossibly long corridor to the end of the rack to see what I could see on the other side of the clothing hedge. Lo and behold, there she was, my little lost Lammy. She had just slipped through underneath the clothes and was admiring the merchandise on the other side. Like the proverbial greener grass, it was probably more colorful than whatever it was I had been looking at. But she was safe, and my heart could beat normally again after my 30 seconds of agony. She, on the other hand, was calm, unaware that she had ever been missing. I had to resist the temptation to react with dramatic joy, though what I really wanted to do was scoop her up and smother her with kisses, maybe treat her to an ice cream. So happy I was to have her back. So if I could react this way to such a minor episode of lostness, I can only imagine the joy someone would have over recovering someone or something who was really and truly lost. So I totally appreciate Jesus' series of 3 parables about lostness from Luke chapter 15. There's the lost sheep, which is so precious that the shepherd leaves the other 99 sheep to go in search of the one, stopping only when he has found it. And then he throws a huge party to celebrate, hopefully not with roast lamb. Then there's the woman who loses one of her 10 coins, not a trifling little penny, but a full 1/10 of her total wealth, kind of a big deal. So naturally she lights a lamp and she sweeps the whole house until she has recovered her treasure. And just like that shepherd, she too throws a block party so that everyone should share in her joy. They might have even roasted a lamb from the local shepherd, just please not that little lost one we've come to love so well. The final parable of the sequence is the one we call the parable of the prodigal son, that wonderful rich story about the kid who insists that his father give him the inheritance early so he can go out into the world and squander it on the worst possible choices. Well, maybe that wasn't the plan, but that's what he did. And when he found himself at rock bottom, starving to death among people who didn't even see him as human, living in a literal pig pen, craving the very slop fed to those pigs, but not to him. Then and only then did he decide to crawl back home and beg his father to let him be a slave. He'd do any menial thing, sleep in the barn, just so long as he could eat a little bit now and then. And even if you don't know the story, you can guess how it would go from the other 2 before it. That father throws an extravagant party, kills the fatted calf, dresses the pigpen kid in the finest of robes, gives him the best welcome home. And everyone is thrilled, except for the brother, who's like, I stayed here the whole time doing the work of my loser brother who left, and he gets all this? We should get lost again. Now, all 3 of these stories are called parables, meaning they aren't what we would call true stories, but they do teach us an important truth, kind of like our fairy tales, right? We know there wasn't really a Little Red Riding Hood who got eaten by a talking wolf dressed as her granny, but the story has an important lesson to teach its listeners. Fairy tales teach through exaggeration so that we will not miss the point. And so it is with Jesus' 3 parables, which he told to show his listeners just how greatly God rejoices when any of the lost are found. 1 son out of 2, 1 coin out of 10, 1 sheep out of 100. Each one is of infinite value to the God who treasures them all as though they were the only one. But why did Jesus tell such parables, and to whom? Let's listen to how the 15th chapter of Luke begins. It's the setup to the parables. It says, all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the legal experts were grumbling, saying, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. The Pharisees and the legal experts were grumbling, not rejoicing over the wonderful sight of all these tax collectors and sinners gathering around Jesus and even eating with him. Can you believe it? Who does that? Who eats with sinners? Who welcomes them to the table? Who feasts with the lost? Who celebrates their return to the fold? So much grumbling, no rejoicing. Those darn Pharisees and legal experts, what on earth is wrong with them? We would never grumble about Jesus' welcome of the tax collectors and sinners, at least not from the distance of 2,000 years, but up close. Last Sunday, a new guy showed up in church. He sat in the very back in the corner, as far away from anyone as he could be. I think he was worried he might not smell so nice, which was kind of true. He'd been living rough. He told me all he had left was his faith in God and the kindness of people, and he felt drawn to worship because he needed both. Thankfully, we were serving lunch after church, and he joined us, sharing his story with his table mates. We assessed his needs, finding it was simple enough to meet the immediate ones. A meal we'd already cooked, please take seconds. New socks and shoes for his sore feet. Someone dashed over to Dollar General, problem solved. A ride to the next town over, maybe a $4 bus fare to get closer to county services, that was easy. I'm so proud of my congregation for welcoming that lost child of God and showing him kindness. And I'm also aware that we did the easy part, facilitating his swift departure to the next stop on his journey, far from here. We offered him generous hospitality for the afternoon, but we didn't exactly welcome him home and give him a room like that extravagant father in Jesus' parable. Not that this guy was asking for a place to stay, but I'm also thinking he might not have declined it had we offered. I thought about this a lot after I got home that day, and I sat down to read the first chapter of a book called Cherished Belonging. It was written by Father Gregory Boyle. Now, Father Greg, in case you don't know his work, he's the famous founder of Homeboy Industries, which is a ministry serving the former gang members of East LA who wish for a different life. For 40 years, Father Greg has worked to create a culture of love and belonging that has transformed thousands of human beings, turning hardened gang members into productive members of the community. Despite the hate mail and the bomb threats, even death threats, Father Gregory refuses to relinquish his radical Christ-like philosophy, which is this: everyone is unshakably good, no exceptions, and we belong to each other, no exceptions. This is the why that has become the what of Homeboy Industries, which is all about creating a community of welcome that cherishes each member. The goal is healing, repair, and restoration, healing the wounds rather than punishing. One man who was healed by this approach now tells teenagers, if love was a place, that place would be Homeboy. Many of us learn to love in our childhood homes, but we know that isn't true for all of God's beloved children. Sadly, children growing up in deep poverty, surrounded by violence and addiction, don't always get the message that they are beloved and safe. They might grow armor to survive. They might join gangs for protection. They might numb their pain with substances that will eventually destroy them. And their children, they get to grow up with more of the same. It's a vicious cycle. And the answer is not tougher policies or stronger locks, nor is it looking away from or demonizing those we don't understand. Father Gregory writes that God's loving expansiveness wants us to look at each other, to be the generosity of God, to nurture each other into becoming a community of cherished belonging. We receive sustenance and choose to sustain each other. And this isn't only about looking out for those who have fallen upon hard times. It's also about recognizing that we belong to those who think and act very differently from us. Just this last week, as we prepared for our National Day of Mourning, the tragedy of September 11th, gunshots rang out on 2 American campuses, a high school in Colorado and a university in Utah. Human lives were destroyed, irreversible harm done to families and communities, and everyone who will forever bear the trauma of having seen these things happen before their very eyes. And while all of these murders are horrifying, the added layers of grief are the ways in which the events divide us. Instead of agreeing that gun violence and murder are atrocities that should never happen, People are using these incidents to deepen the divides between tribes of human beings. How people feel about firearm possession, whether it should be fiercely protected or severely limited, should never overshadow the fact that children were gunned down in school by another child. This should never happen. Those children belonged to us all. And while we continue arguing about the controversial issue of gun rights, the shootings will continue. And how people related to the message of Mr. Kirk has caused some to demonize him and others to elevate him to sainthood. Both reactions grossly missed the point. A human life was lost in an act of gun violence. It was a tragedy, no question about that. And whether you agreed with his controversial views or not, it is neither appropriate to say he deserved to be shot, nor to wish a painful death upon his murderer. And I have seen both kinds of responses from people I know personally, and it disturbs me. Have we really forgotten that we belong to each other? Charlie Kirk belonged to us as well as his assassin, and they belonged to each other because we all belong to each other, no exceptions, and we are all good at our core, no exceptions. I know that sounds crazy. Jesus' opponents thought it was crazy too, which is why they grumbled when he sat down with all of those wretched outcasts and feasted. If Jesus were living now, who would be at his table? And how would we react to that? With grumbling or with celebration? Grumbling is a natural default. We all do it some, but when we can get beyond it, there is a real blessing to be found. I recently attended a training during which we were asked to partner up and share the most compassionate thing we'd ever done or seen. My partner was a retired hospice nurse. She told me about treating a hospice patient who was a convicted child molester. She found this horrifying, and she might have grumbled a little bit about having to serve him, yet she decided to treat her patient kindly. And you know what, she reflected? He was actually kind of sweet. Of course he was. Because remember, everyone is unshakably good, no exceptions, and we belong to each other, no exceptions. That nurse looked beyond the patient's unthinkable history and offered grace and mercy, seeing him as someone intrinsically good, like God sees all of us, no matter what's on our rap sheet. And that nurse treated her patient as though he belonged to her, which of course he did, not only because she had been assigned to care for him, but because he was born human, just like she was, although likely to a very different kind of parents, because we've got to wonder, what kind of a home produced such a child? What kind of belonging was he denied? What was he made to believe about his own goodness or worth? There's an African proverb that says, children not warmed by the fires of the village will burn it down. And that child's wounds were deeper than he knew how to manage, which does not excuse the harm he inflicted on others, but neither does it revoke his need for forgiveness. And if our loving and merciful God is capable of forgiving even one such as this, who are we to withhold forgiveness from anyone, to grumble at the welcome he receives with Jesus, or begrudge him the celebratory feast? Friends, we belong to each other, no exceptions, and we are all welcomed and celebrated, every one of us who has ever been lost. Which begs the question, who is lost? For sure, those who struggle with addiction or debilitating mental illness or pathological behaviors. But let's not assume that those of us who seem to have our stuff together are entirely unlost. At Jesus' table, the ones who had found him were the sinners. They were the ones enjoying the feast, while from the sidelines, those Pharisees who had spent lifetimes following God's rules, apparently without letting God's love permeate their hearts, grumbled. Were they maybe a bit lost themselves? Is it possible to be righteous and still need to be found? I read a commentary on the parables in which theologian and preacher David Lowes asked questions like, might the parents who want their children to succeed so much that they wrap their whole lives around hockey games and dance recitals be lost? Might the career-minded man or woman who has made moving up the ladder the one and only priority be lost? Might the folks who work jobs they hate just to give their family things they never had be lost? Might the senior who has great pension plan but little sense of meaning since retirement be lost? Might the teenager who works so hard to be perfect and who is willing to do just about anything to fit in be lost? Might the earnest Christian who is constantly asking whether other people have accepted Jesus into their hearts be lost? These are interesting questions to reflect upon. It turns out that we have all been lost. But the good news, my friends, is this. To all of us, we who are both sinners and saints, complex and imperfect beings, to all of us, Jesus says, welcome home. You are good. You belong. You belong to God and you belong to each other. Let's celebrate.